This episode of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast has been brought to you by our sponsors at Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is a PR collective that values people over profit. They put a different spin on public relations by working primarily with friends and using all profits to aid charitable organizations. With a roster that includes Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Brainiac, Get Some, Funeral Date, Damian Dunn, and many more artists, record labels, and podcasts. Sweet Cheetah. That's a great PR cohort. You can find them on social media by simply searching Sweet Cheetah PR, and they'll be there. He's been Tim. I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful. So we've been trying to get this in for a long time, Austin. I think mostly it's my fault because, old man raising my grandpa dad. I have a 4-year-old on top of my 23-year-old. So yeah, I apologize for that.
I share in that blame. I have 2 little ones. So I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And on top of everything else that I've going on, that's why I said, hey, if we're going to do this, we got to do it late at night. That's the only time I've got.
Yeah, that's the only time I'm able to do it either, to be quite honest. And more often than not, that causes issues. But I mean, I take my wins where I can. But I wanted to, before we get to, the Shady Side record, which is forthcoming, and I'm going to air this around the same time as its release. I want to know your story. Like, it's ever since I discovered your label years ago and looking at this incredible roster, you can't really pin it down. Everybody's different. There's not, the only common thread is being adjacent maybe to the scene, but none of it is, like how Victory Records was the metalcore label, and for a long time Revelation was the Youth Crew label. Mind Over Matter is just as eclectic as any punk related label could possibly be. And I guess what I wanted to know first is what drove you to start the label?
Good question. It's a funny story. So, the first release on the label was Evergreen Terrace, Burned Alive by Time. We licensed it from Eulogy Records, and that actually started because I was at an Evergreen Terrace show, and the drummer wasn't feeling well, and so the show ended, and they were like, "Hey, like we're all going to hang out here at the venue, but our drummer needs to go back to the hotel. Would anyone be willing to drive him?" And I needed to get home anyway, so I was like, "Hey, I'll take him.
Yeah.
Why not?" So we were just driving to his hotel, and I said, "Hey, like this is weird to me, like your band, you have members in Casey Jones and all these other, affiliates that they have vinyl. Why doesn't Evergreen Terrace have any vinyl?" And he just goes, "Why don't you put it out?" And I was like, "Why don't I put it out?" And so at the time, a buddy of mine, he ran a record label, and I was half-assedly helping him out. I hate to even use that phrase because I don't think I did much of anything to really assist him. But I was like, well, maybe I could do it on, maybe I could pitch it to him. But he was focused mostly on CDs, and so I was like, all right, let's do this. And so when the label originally began, I had a couple of friends who we all pooled some money together so we could afford the licensing fees from Eulogy. And as I'm pretty sure everybody does, you send the package off to Pirates Press and you hope for the best when it comes back. And the only thing that I knew that I wanted to do a little bit differently was I wanted to screen print the jackets. And at the time, I had never done any kind of like flat stock printing at all. I knew how to screen print a lot of t-shirts, hoodies, things like that. But I literally taught myself how to print on cardboard, on paper, for the Evergreen Terrace release. And of course, it was a 5-color print. It was a nightmare. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never used the ink before. We had like rope and clothespin all around my house, and it took me probably 7-8 months to finish printing all of those records when they were done. And we pressed 500 of them, which was far too many at the time. And so it was a nightmare to do all of that. But that really kind of like kickstarted the process. And then for me, the art of doing the screen printed jackets, it was almost a necessity because it was something that I could do on my own for relatively cheap. And as anyone who's ever pressed a record knows, getting jackets manufactured is expensive. It almost doubles the cost of the production. And so I was like, well, this is a skill that I have. I have the materials and the equipment. At the time, I had a lot more time, so I said, hey, I can just do all this by hand. And to me, that felt a lot more punk rock to do it that way. So, so I kind of stuck with that. And then it was for me now, still to this day, and the Shadyside release is another example of that. Like, I always want to kind of top myself. I want to do something bigger, badder, cooler than I had done on the previous release. And that kind of becomes my driving force. Is like, how can I create something that is just wholly unique and something that no one else is doing right now? And I stay up at night just thinking of weird shit I can do with vinyl.
What I really dig too is like pretty recently, the new Damien Dunn record has a very unique and specific, I forget what you'd called it, over the top of the actual cover. I remember Integrity had done similar things in the past with their records, but the way you did it, I think topped that. Well, what's the name of that process?
Oh yeah, it's a spot gloss.
Spot gloss. How did you even how'd that occur to you?
So I had the materials to do that, and I had never done it quite like I did on that release. And we knew we wanted to do gloss to begin with, but when you send it out to get it manufactured, it comes back very light gloss. Like, you can kind of see it if you hold it to the light just right, but it doesn't really pop. And Damien, he's very specific. So he's like, I want it to pop. I need it to be big and bold, but also invisible. And so I was like, okay, of course, that is a request that only Damien would make.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like toying around with the idea, and I initially started with saying, hey man, let me screen print this. And he said, no man, like, I think it needs to be bigger and bolder. And I was like, trust me, I think I can do this. But then the place that I use for some of my print work locally here in Chicago, I was dropping some stuff off, and they had some samples from one of their vendors, and they had this, it was a poster, I think it was for like some booze advertisement or something, but it had this insanely thick 3D spot gloss that almost looked like it was like embossed, it was raised up off the paper, real thick. And so I was like, could you do this on record jackets? And they're like, yes. I said, cool. So we put in the quote, we got everything going. Records were in manufacture. Damien gets me the artwork. I ship the jackets off to get those going. And then the vendor comes back and they're like, oh, hey, we misquoted you for this. It's actually going to be twice as much. And at this point, I mean, I think it came out something to the tune of like almost $4,200 just for 200 jackets. And, it was an additional $13 or $14 per record. And so I called Damien. I was like, dude, like, it doesn't make sense. We can't do that. Like, yes, it would have been sweet. I was like, but man, like, now we're looking at having to charge people almost $40 a record for this. I was like, I think that's a bridge too far. So I said, I need you to trust me. I'm going to screen print this. And he went, all right, man, go for it. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith from Damien. We came full circle. We ended up back where I started with, let me do this by hand. And then I screen printed them just like I would anything else. The only real difference with those was that ink, it has to cure for like 48 hours. And I don't have a proper printing studio. So they were literally just hanging in my garage. I had like little binder clips and everything all hanging around the garage. So no one could use the garage for a few days while while I got everything going. But in the end, I think Damien was really happy with how they turned out. And, we got exactly what we're hoping for, is a nice, thick, bold gloss, but ultimately doesn't take away from that artwork, because that artwork was just so stark and perfect that we didn't want to have anything taking away from it. It had to be subtle.
And, the way you'd done the Guilt record, I thought probably more from an audio perspective than anything was like, we all had a problem with the way Bardstown Ugly Box sounded. The only way back in the 90s that you could listen to a good version of Bardstown was on the cassette. The cassette version sounded great. The CD sounded terrible, and the vinyl sounded real bad. So like you pretty much resurrected and reintroduced a classic post-hardcore album to an entirely new generation of people. And as you know, we're both very good friends with Duncan. Um, how did that come to pass? Because I know you'd been doing solo stuff with him.
Yeah. That one, honestly, that one, I feel like I did nothing. Duncan was the one who really spearheaded um, getting the audio remastered, and I think he sent me about probably 12 different iterations of the remix and the remaster, as he was tweaking it. And admittedly, at one point, I was like, Duncan, I can't tell the difference, man. They both sound great. I can't A, B, and tell which one is different. But he had a vision in his mind. But all of that really goes really far back. And there's a friend of the label. His name is Juan. You might have seen him. He posts occasionally on some of our social media. We joke around. We call him my chief lackey.
Mhm.
But Juan and I have been friends for a while, and he's been a big supporter of the label for a long time. And there's been a couple of instances where he's basically said, like, he introduced me to someone and said, "Hey, you should meet Austin. You guys should work together." And Duncan was one of those people. And so back in 2018, I was doing I tried to do a 7-inch of the month club where I tried to release a 7-inch every month. That was impossible, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't try to do that. It was a nightmare. But I did release 12 7-inches, and one of them was Duncan as a solo work, and he really wanted to do a holiday release. So he claimed December and said, "I'm going to do something for Christmas." Said, "Great, let's do it." So we had a lot of fun with that. And while we were working on that, he had his solo full length, and he was working with another label. And I'm not entirely sure what went wrong with it, but it went south. And so he called me up kind of in the 0 hour and you just said, like, "Hey, listen, like, this thing is dead in the water. Will you help me release it?" And I said, "Of course." So we did that, and we brought that to life, and that was the Colony Collapse LP, which is beautiful. So
Yeah.
I'm super excited that we got to work on that. Um, and while we were working on that, he kind of like dropped that hint, like, "Hey, would you ever want to do this Guilt reissue? I'm kind of working on some stuff." I was like, "Sure, of course." And that's when he started sending me some of those remixes, and that's when I was like, "This is going to be special. Like, this is incredible." Um, and so from there, with that release, you're right. Like, the focus was on that remix and that remaster because that stole the show.
Yeah.
And the artwork for that release was super special and important to the band and to Duncan. And so we were immediately like, okay, we're not screwing with that. We're not going to do anything to take away from that. We just want to make sure that it's preserved and that it looks terrific on a 12-inch record. And so then where I got to kind of step in a little bit was with the release show version. So we created a separate kind of slip cover that went over the record.
Hmm.
And we made a small batch of those for people that were going to be in attendance in Louisville for the release show. So that there was still a little bit of like a DIY touch and something screen printed and fun with it. But all of that just kind of, again, it kind of just fell into my lap. Juan introduced us. We did that 7-inch. That other label wasn't able to make the 12-inch happen, and then he said, "Hey, this is all going great. How do you feel about Guilt?" Of course, I was like, "I feel great about Guilt. We should definitely work on that."
They're in my opinion, every hardcore band or hardcore adjacent band Duncan has ever been in was vastly important. I love Endpoint. When I first started going to hardcore shows in the late 80s, I saw Endpoint. One of my first shows was Endpoint. But for some reason, Guilt and the album Bardstown Ugly Box are there. It's such a massive touchstone for my youth. Because the things I'd gotten into, like my favorite band now and then, was Neurosis. And anybody who was as out there and forward thinking as Neurosis, that was my stuff. So when Duncan made that switch from, melodic hardcore to this very aggressive, very cerebral, artsy band, and they put out that first 10-inch Synesthesia, it just took me on a path, legitimately. Like it changed the way I played music as a musician. So it's just so special to me that you got to put it out, because I've been buying your records for years. I think I have a stack of those note cards you send out, probably that thick.
That's the question that I have for anyone who's listening to this, who's ever supported the label. If you bought more than one release, the question is, the notes that I write, do you keep them? And
I,
if you keep them, do they stay with the record you bought, or do you
mine
keep them
do.
separately?
Mine stay inside the 12-inch sleeve or 7-inch sleeve, whichever. And what's really amusing is most Mind Over Matter releases that I own doubles or maybe triples of. So I have, like, you would think the notes would be duplicate notes, but they're not. They're different. Every single one is different.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's fun for me. I can't remember ever ordering anything from maybe Ebullition is one of the only labels I'd ever ordered from where I got a handwritten note. But when I was a kid, ordering from Alternative Tentacles or Revelation, or I'm trying to think of some like Smorgasbord, any of those labels, nothing. So that it's a very personal experience to hand over my hard-earned cash to you, because there's a reciprocity and an appreciation there that you're not going to get ordering from any other DIY label. And I salute you for that, because it's very important, and it makes to me, it makes me feel like I felt 30 years ago going to shows, 35 years ago, where it was a real community for me. And, I was a part of it. It wasn't just a one-sided relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, gave me chills just saying all that. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming for, truly, like I'm not aiming to be that label that's going to suddenly start needing to press 10,000 records. Like I'm really pleased with the niche community that I've created. And even down just little things, like there's a support of the label. I see his name on everything, and every now and again I'll throw a free record or a free T-shirt in or whatever. And then he was at Furnace Fest, and there was a release that I really wanted, and I was like, "Dude, will you help me out? Will you pick this up?" And he's like, "Absolutely, least I could do." And it's like I love that just kind of like community piece of it. Um, and that experience that you mentioned, like that's 100% by design. I want to make it. To your point, no one has a lot of extra money right now. So whenever anyone spends money on something that I've put out, I'm truly appreciative. And so I want to make it more of an experience, right? So yeah, I don't like to do pre-orders, so I won't put something up and then have the record ship 6, 8 months later, because I
Yeah.
think that's a bad experience. The handwritten notes are a huge part of it. And, I stole that from other labels. It's not new.
Yeah.
But I remember, early Bridge 9, maybe even Level Plane, a few other places where, I'd get a CD and there'd be a little note, just thank you. And I thought, how can I do that and ramp it up a notch, and that's, I've got the little 5x5 cards, and, I just write a quick little note, nothing crazy, but it slows things down for sure. I could do mail order in a fraction of the time if I cut that step out. I think about it all the time, but I'm like, oh, I can't. Like that's a part of the experience. Same with like the making my own mailers. The custom screen printed boxes that everything
I
gets
saved
sent out
those
in.
too.
That's the other question. Second question for the listeners: who here keeps their mailers?
Hold on a second.
The barn sound. So good.
Well, if you look behind me, there's over. I haven't done a count recently. I have to go on my Discogs and find out how many I own, but I think I'm around like 7,800 pieces of vinyl in this room currently. I have a problem. I don't know if there's
Same.
any help for that.
We could start one. I'm sure we're not the only ones who need it.
Support group. Yeah. So I didn't pay my mortgage, but I got 8 versions of the new SSD reissue, and which I didn't get 8. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because they just reissued. The kids will have their say.
Yeah.
I got the one that for the people who bought hats and stuff off Al Baril. from the Exclaim website. If you ordered something from him, he sent you a card with a number on it and didn't tell anybody what it was for years. And then when this reissue was coming, he said, if you have one of these cards, email me with your email address and your card number, and you'll be eligible to get this special release. So it took a couple days for that to happen, but long story short, I ended up ordering every version of it that came out.
Amazing.
I know, it's sad. Like, what am I going to do with that? I'm not going to listen to all of them. I'm gonna find one that I desire the physically the least, play that one, and like meticulously store the rest of them because I'm a whack job and I'll probably never sell them. I own a copy of Judge Chunk Hink and Suck It that I could have sold when I was broke so many times. I could have gotten myself out of so many jams. Now I just fetishize it.
Yeah. I definitely have a handful of bands where, I've set out to get everything, and it's problematic, whenever those bands have new releases coming up, I'm instantly like sweating, like, oh God, how am I going to afford all of this?
Here it comes. Like, but a lot of the notes I've gotten from you are like, I don't even know how you knew about this because I didn't blast it out on social media yet. And I've gotten that note from you a couple times. And the answer is this: I'm friends with half of these people. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, they give you the heads up.
Yeah, a lot of the people on your label are my buddies. So I just, hey, dude, it's out. Okay, done.
Well, it's wild because like everything that I do is manual, right? So like, I had a buddy of mine who helped me create the website, but I maintain it. And so when there's a new release that's coming up, like I'm literally coding it, and then I have to like click a button and then it goes live, So when I click that button and it goes live, and then 30 seconds later your name pops up, I'm truly just like, what the fuck? Like, I haven't even had time to pick up my phone yet and say, hey, this is available, and somehow Peter has already ordered 2 copies of it. Like, for a while there, I was thinking that you had like an RSS feed or something, so you just knew when the site updated, and then started to panic, like, all the stuff I'm doing in the background.
I just, especially Damien and Duncan, I'm like they're buddies of mine, so they let me know, like, yo, it's coming, here it is. So there's no magic involved because I'm legitimately in front of a computer. I'm not gifted by any stretch. I don't know. Why do you think I have Vinny hanging out here? Because there was no way I was going to be able to figure out how to do a video podcast. You can edit it out, Vinny. Don't get mad at me.
It's all gravy.
You've kind of struck gold with a certain artist, and they are kind of like huge right now. My daughter knows about this band, and I find it strange because she was raised around all of this music and dad being in hardcore bands and stuff, and never really interested. And then what was it, Bad Rabbits?
Yeah,
they're on she loves them. She turned me on to them. And like, they're on your label. I know who they are, but I didn't really get a chance to like fully get into them. And my daughter turns me on to them. And I'm like, they must be big if she likes them because she likes pop music. How did that relationship come to pass?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, are you familiar with the band Erapress?
Mm-hmm.
On Translation Loss?
Yep.
Erapress was on tour with a band called Battlefields. Members of Examination of the, some South Dakotan, screamo emo bands. But so Battlefields and Erapress were on tour, and they came through my old hometown, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And as was the time before Children, when bands were coming through, I said, hey, you can stay at my place if you need a place to crash. So the Erapress dudes decided to crash at my place. I'd never met them before. But Sheil, the drummer, is also the drummer in Bad Rabbits. And their Erapress's tour manager, Salim, is the guitarist in Bad Rabbits. And so they were there for this, this metal show. And Salim hands me this CD and is like, hey, this is our other band. You should check it out. Sweet. Had no expectations of what that was going to sound like. But given the show we were at, I was like, certainly this is going to be some incredible like metal stuff they just handed me. And so we go about our days. They were there that night. We did the rock show. It's a side note, Aeropress, absolutely incredible. I tell the story all the time, but like they played in my friend's living room, and it was almost like they had tuned their entire sound to play in that living room. I'd never heard a punk show that sounded that good, and they were just so tight. It was flawless. Anyhow, a couple days go by. Finally, I'm like, all right, let's check out this CD, and I put it in, and of course, it's this like funk R&B pop thing. And I'm like, this is wild. What is this? I did not expect it. But I have very eclectic taste. So I was like, this is fantastic. So I was digging it. When they gave it to me, like, hey, we're about to have an EP that's gonna come out as well. And this was still in like the MySpace era. And
Mm.
so they put this EP out and they were just like, hey, for free, check it out. Stick up kids. And I was at work that day and I remember I gave it one listen and then I immediately brought it back home to my girlfriend, now wife, and I was like, "You're gonna fucking love this." And so I put it on, and sure enough, just instant dance party. And so I reached back out through friends of friends to get a hold of Sheila and Salim, and I said, "Hey, can I put this out on vinyl?" And they were like, "Sure." We don't know who you are. Go for it. you know. And they were still very early in their in their career, and and that was the first kind of like whiff because I think that was my sixth release, right? So I had had a few just kind of like farting around or whatever. But just like I had been doing to that point, I wanted to like top myself. I wanted to make it crazy. So, I came up with this crazy die cut jacket that I had each one cut one at a time with a laser. And then it was like a 6 color screen print and did all these things. And I made these elaborate boxes, that I glued them all together and the little flaps with Velcro. Just spent months working on these things, just thinking no one's gonna buy these. Like this is so absurd. Why am I putting all this money into it? And so I was so nervous that no one was gonna buy it that I priced them at a loss because I was like, all right, I'm taking a risk on this, and this is this band that's totally out of left field, even for what I've put out so far. And of course they sold out just super fast, and so
Yep.
took the world's biggest L on them. And I was like, well, yeah, you live, you learn. And then instantly people were like, please repress this. And the band was like, nope. They were like, this is so cool. It is so cool that the demand is there. And I was like, yeah, man, but like people are paying like $200 for these on eBay.
Yeah, the resale's ridiculous on those.
So I was like, don't you want to make some of that money? And they're like, no, fuck it. Let it roll. And I was like, okay. And so it was literally, it wasn't literally until the 10-year anniversary of that record that they finally let me repress it. After 10 years of me being like, please, let's just do another run of it. We can do anything. They're like, no dice. Even to that point, I remember seeing them at a show one time, and I think it was Celine, and he just said, like, no way, dude, we're never going to repress that. We're going to let that just be the world's most expensive record. So I'm glad that they changed their mind on it
I think it's,
because it was getting out of hand.
though, these fetish items, like, they become lore, don't they? I have so many like 7 inches and stuff that, they've become infamous almost. When the first Locust 12-inch was coming out, one of my best friends, he and I were playing in a different band together way before they started in Albatross, but we were playing shows with the Locust all the time around here and then driving out to, New York or Philly or wherever to play with them. And they were making this camouflage 12-inch. And everybody was like, oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to see a camouflage 12-inch. The records came out and they were turquoise and pink and like just crazy ugly looking. And they did a short run of those and then finally got the pressing plant to perfect a camouflage look for a 12-inch, which they were happy. But that first run, that very short first run, became this legendary piece, right? Where they were the mistake. And everybody wants this fucking thing. Everybody wants this record for some reason. And you see it going for stupid amounts of money on eBay, and it was a mistake.
Yeah.
Just like you put so much thought and care into something and make it very articulate and like an art piece, a true art piece. You take a loss on it, and you have to at some point wish you'd kept about 50 to 100 of them to put on eBay and come up on them whenever you need like some money.
100%. You have no idea. Every time I see one, like even just this week, um, I saw this guy. I'll call him an acquaintance, but he was someone that he kind of a pull from like a distribution standpoint. And I remember I sent him a copy of Stick Up Kids along with a few others. Never landed the distro, never got anything from that relationship at all. But I saw him, on Facebook and like one of the groups I'm a part of, selling that for, $200. And I was like, man, I gave you that for free.
Yeah, you're a scumbag.
I don't think that, but at the same
No.
time, I'm like, I should have kept it. Like that could have been my $200. I could have put that toward another release or whatever. But I think back even to that Evergreen Terrace release. Toward the end, I still had, and I still had a lot of them, probably 100 copies when I moved from Michigan to California, and that's when I was like, I got to start unloading some of these things. So I was selling them for like $5. Make me an offer, just like take these records off of my hands. I gotta get them out of my house. Fast forward now, same thing. I see them selling for a couple $100. I've got people probably once a month who hit me up like, "Do you have any of these laying around?" It's like I couldn't give these things away 10 years ago. Space is at a minimum. I can't just hold on to everything in the hopes that one day it's going to become cult classic and people are going to want a copy.
And I think that's becoming more and more of a thing with your label. Like there are these records that, maybe they're slow burns for people at first. I don't know what it is, but you'll put something out and then like a year and a half, 2 years later, it like something about them just pops for people. Like that Zayo side project 12-inch you put out. I'm trying to summon the name of the project. It was the dude from Zayo, and it was fucking phenomenal. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Pack.
Yeah, yeah, like like incredible record, right? And I that didn't start selling out immediately at first, did it?
No, and it's that one. That one's my heartbreak record. That 10-inch that I did because it's got that really elaborate screen print on both sides.
Yeah,
that's a band that I think could easily be huge. They've got the sound, the riffs are there. And we put a lot of heart into the records.
yeah.
But it hasn't fully caught on yet. That's when people ask me and they say, "Hey, what's the record that really defines what you do as a label that like sets you apart?" I pull that one out. I'm like, you got to see this. Like screen printed on both sides. It's so sweet. And then I we only made 300 of those. I probably still have 200 left. It's like,
That's
yeah,
that,
and I don't.
it's so
It
good.
breaks my heart. It's so good. It's such a good one. But that I think that's one of those bands that people didn't really expect it. And you said, hey, this is a side project of Zayo and Juliana Theory and Punchline, and then you put it together and you get this like sick, kind of like alternative pop rock thing. Like sick guitar riffs, killer hooks. I don't know. I think people just haven't quite figured out where that lands yet in the genre landscape. It's still very guitar rock driven, and let's be honest, like guitar rock isn't in the mainstream right now. So,
Yeah,
I think it'll have its time in the sun, and I'm guessing that'll be one of those that'll be probably years down the road after I've sold through the last lot of those, and people are like, well, where's this pack 10-inch?
I hope
my new
I
bad
hope
rabbits.
my listeners are like, okay, we're gonna catch on to this and start buying it, because I thought I thought you were gonna tell me a different story, quite
Yeah,
honestly. To me, that seems like it would be a cult type of hit. It was poised to be, I think.
yeah,
It, there's no really gauging what people are going to get into, and that's, I think, where the gamble lies with a venture like yours, which should be a testament to, okay, this guy's definitely not doing it for the money, because there is no guarantee. You could sit on stock for years, or you could spend a ton of money and sell through something and not make money on it. Obviously money is not the point.
definitely not.
What do you think the precedent point is then to give so much of your time and your love and your attention and money to something that's a gamble?
My buddy Damien, he runs a label called Colloquial Sound Recordings, and he one day said to me, he's like, "It's just money. You'll get more of it." And that was after he told me about this insane project that he did, where he paid for an entire year to have a 1-800 number, and then every month he would upload a new song, and you'd have to call this phone number to hear the song. And so, I was like, this is such an incredible idea. And then he told me how much it cost him to have this 1-800 number for a whole year. And I was like, dude, I love you for that. And then he said, that's just money, you'll get more. But like, that's kind of how I view it truly, when things get tough here in normal world, where I have to be an adult and a father and all those other things, like I'll slow it down. I won't put on as much stuff, kind of pump the brakes, won't do as much crazy stuff. But I think, to actually answer your question, I think for me, it's just, it's cheesy, but always been a big part of my life. I think back to, every integral thing that happened to me, and it's like, music is a foundational part of that. And it's cheesy, but like hardcore saved my life, so it's like I feel indebted to give that back into the world. And I think that where I strive to just do things a little bit differently is, I think anyone can upload music to Spotify. I think anyone can save up a couple grand and ship off that package to Pirates Press and get it back. I want to make it, going back, if you're going to spend hard-earned money on something, if you're going to gamble back on me what I've gambled out into the world, I want to make it an experience. I want to make it fun. I want to make it unique. It's going to be, just opening the package. It's going to be something different than you've maybe ever done from any other mail order you've ever placed. In the time of mail order, which is all we do now, how can I make that one box sitting on your porch different or better or cool? And, the part that I always grapple with is that, like, what do I charge for these things? Because at the end of the day, I put an absurd amount of time into these things, even though they don't necessarily cost me a lot of money to do the screen printing part or to fold them all down and glue them up. But then I'm like, well, how do I charge for my time? Is that relevant to the person who wants to buy it, and always wanting to kind of toe that line between, I want to get the music out there and I want people to have that experience, while also not pricing people out and have them go, well, I'm not going to take the risk on this. I'm not going to gamble with my money, because what if I don't like this record? What if it's not cool enough? And that's why, it's almost always a loss. There's very few records that I've put out where I can say, yeah, I made back the money that I put into it. And if you can guarantee, if you ever see that sold out button on my website, that means I've just barely made back what I put into it, if even. There's no big profits soaring around over Meta Records, but that's always the goal. Is like, can I make back what I put into it, so that I can put that into something else and try to make it cyclical, so that I can keep kind of putting music back out into the world.
What was the first record that really bit you, like, that made you want to create an experience like this? The first time you bought a piece of vinyl, opened it up, and had such an immersive tactile experience that you thought to yourself, oh God, I have to do something like this?
Ooh, I don't know that there's any one necessarily, but I can think back to two things that really kind of jump out. I mean, the first one are like early Page 99 records. They were all document number blank or whatever. And, I think about some of the ones that had like crime scene photo negatives in them, or they're wrapped in bubble wrap. And then, Magic Bullet, at their earlier phases, they always had really cool packaging.
Oh yeah.
And so some of those things, along with, that buddy of mine that I mentioned back when I was first talking about Evergreen Terrace, he did a lot of the same things with CDs. And so when I said I helped him, like, I sat around and watched him create these really cool CD packages. And it was really like, I saw how he was getting that back out into the world. And so I wanted to translate those kind of things into the vinyl medium, which is what I was always passionate about, while kind of leveraging some of the niche skills that I had acquired over the years with screen printing and things like that. So it kind of became an amalgam. I can't say that it was any one thing that said, yes, this is what I want to do, but throughout my life, did a lot of different things with music. And, even the idea of kind of starting the label kind of stemmed from, I used to be in a band, and when I couldn't or didn't want to do that any longer, how do I still be a part of the music community without trying to find, time to practice 3 nights a week with the guys? So it was like, well, a label provides me that space to still be involved in the scene and still network, still build that community, but kind of play a different role in the process.
And there's something coming out very soon that is relative to when this will be released, which is my friends in Shadyside, and they're, don't call it a comeback, but it's a comeback for them. Like we haven't heard from them in a very long time. And this vinyl, I know nothing of the cover. No one's shown me anything, but Wendell has teased me, and you just did online as well, with just the outer edge of test presses with what looks to be like Swiss cheese holes throughout the edge of the vinyl itself. And of course, Wendell sends me that picture a little while back, and I have to quote Anchorman, "You ate an entire wheel of cheese? Like, what are you showing me right now?" So where does this stem from, and what is kind of the idea behind the holy vinyl?
Yeah. So so first let's talk about how Shadyside entered my world, which I think is important. Casey from Iodine.
No, I love you, Vin.
Casey from Iodine hit me up and just said, hey, there's this awesome record, friends of mine. I just don't have the space on my roster right now, my calendar. You should check them out. And when Casey from Iodine sends you a link to an album, you stop and you listen to it,
Yep.
And so, shout out to Casey, because he's someone that has absolutely no reason to believe in what I do, and he's someone that I look up to. And so, to have him sing praises to the work that I do is monumental to me. It blows my mind. So he sends me the the SoundCloud link, and I listen to it, and I'm instantly like, yes, this is incredible. Not at all. It sounds different than I anticipated, knowing the records from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But at the same time, perfectly familiar. And I think for old folks such as us, it's incredible to hear bands that when they make that leap, and you're like, hey, I matured, so did they, and they matured at the exact same trajectory that I did, and the music has evolved perfectly with what I still am currently in love with. And recognizing that, if it was the same record that came out 20 years ago, it wouldn't resonate the same. It wouldn't feel the same. So I was instantly in love, and I was like, yes, absolutely, let's do it. So kind of fast forward to there, the album art, I believe it's Michael's son, Michael Malarkey. It's a picture of his son blowing bubbles. And so it's this really washed out image, beautiful, like blues and greens with all these bubbles surrounding him. And so, when I first started talking to the band and we were spitballing, and as we're learning about each other, and I'm introducing, hey, I'm this label and I do crazy stuff with packaging, so I want to make this insane. Do you have any thoughts? And they were like, oh, what do you want to do? So I mulled over it for a little bit. And the only thing that I could think of was, this is an EP, it belongs on a 10-inch. Pressing a 10-inch is not financially responsible, because they literally press a 12-inch and cut the edges off.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to charge just as much, and then that goes back to my eternal debate of, what do I charge for this? Because this is clearly an EP, but I have to charge LP prices because that's what I'm being charged for them. So then I thought, well, how can I maintain it as a 12-inch anyhow, and still find something cool to do with it? And so I thought, well, maybe I could have it pressed like a 10-inch. Maybe I could do something fun with that outer edge. And I was like, you know what? What if we were to bring that bubble theme and try to make it look like there were bubbles going around the outer edge of the record, and you could just start the music and instant some change into the record. And I made the world's crappiest mock-up I sent it over to the band and said, "What do you think?" And they went, "Cool." And I was like, "That's the worst mock-up." Like, I don't know how they bought into this idea, but they were on board. So, so then I had to go through the steps of, talking to the person who's going to cut the lacquer to make sure they understood my vision. I was like, there can't be anything in that outer edge. Pretend like they're going to cut it off like a 10-inch, but don't cut it off like a 10-inch. And getting it to the pressing plant, same thing. Like, hey, you got to make sure you don't do anything to this outer edge. It still needs to be a 12-inch. And once those were done, then I had to find someone who would help me cut those out. And so it wasn't done in the manufacturing stage because there's a lot of really intricate little tiny holes in there. Actually, I have one right here. I'll show you, just that way the people who are watching this have a better idea. But here's the whole record. And so you can see there's some little tiny holes in there, and we were not going to be able to make a die that was going to cut those out and have it look clean. But if they were too big, they wouldn't look like bubbles, So that was the whole thing, is like, how do I still actually make it look like bubbles and not look like Swiss cheese?
I only saw a very small piece, so
yeah, no, for sure. I gave a little teaser. But I worked with a gentleman that I've used for a lot of different stuff, and they were laser cut, and so they're being cut out one at a time by a laser. And we're only doing it on a small portion of the pressing. The rest of them I'm going to screen print the bubbles, and they'll look a little bit more like bubbles because we can add more texture and detail into the screen print than we can when they're being cut out. But this one's going to be a nice little test, I think. Not just for fans of the band, but I think this is going to bring some people into the record that maybe are just curious about this as a physical creation. Up to this point, I've been saying that I had never seen another record with die cut like along the record, and then I saw one today.
Really?
Today, and I was like, "Oh, it was original to me, but it's not original in the world." And it was a Jimi Hendrix 7-inch of like him is the Star Spangled Banner, and it had these stars cut out along the outer edge. And I was like, "Man, I ripped off Jimi Hendrix and didn't even know it."
At least you ripped off Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
You didn't go to some lesser god. Like, if you're ripping off Hendrix or Mark Bolan, I'm on board. I'm 100% with you. And but you didn't rip anybody off. You were following a theme. Just so we understand each other, you're saving me one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Set aside. I mean, as if you're not going to be the first person to order it.
I am going to be the first person to order it, and we all know this. But
well, I might try and beat him to that. I got ordered for the whole band ourselves, so
as long as I get one, that's all I care about. But I have to. I know we're supposed to pretend Vinny's not here, but I got to give Vinny flowers really quick, and we could cut it out if you want, Vin, but I don't think we should. The past, like, you guys know my podcasts, it's always like I've made like really crappy little commercials, you know what I mean? I never did like a video podcast. The only time I ever had my wife make video for me was for the first time Michael came on my podcast. He's been on a bunch since, but I had to put his face on there because he's a pretty man, and
he kind of is.
Yeah, and most of us have faces for radio. I'm talking about me. Austin, you're a handsome man, but you know what I mean? Like, nobody wants to look at me.
We did talk about your hair during our little break.
Yeah,
so.
I wish I had some of that shit. But a male pattern baldness skinhead. Oi, oi. But there's it's really special to me that I have Vinny with me here, and I have Michael to thank, because Mike and I became buddies just from him being on the podcast, staying in touch, and we just kept doing shit together. And then I meet the Shady Side guys, and Vinny just comes to me and says, "Yo, I want to do video for you." Basically, kind of like, who does your video? That's how it went. Who does your video? Yeah, me. I suck at it. Why you?
Yeah, that was almost verbatim, but yeah.
And I know his vision was he was going to lay in the background, but I don't know, man. I think this is great. I just wanted to, I wanted to point it out. I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you.
Thanks, sir. Well, since we're being sappy fuckers, let me also take this time to speak on behalf of the band and just show our appreciation to you, Pete, to you, Austin, also with Tim over at Sweet Cheetah. It's a majority of the career of Shady Side has been lots of DIY, us pushing our vision, our music, our sound, and it's just this humbling, refreshing appreciation that other people are pushing for us or with us, you know, and it's very genuine. So, on behalf of the band and myself, I would like to thank you three. And don't tell anyone I'm this sappy, because that's it. That's all you get.
All right. Thank you, Penny.
All right, get back to your podcast.
Yeah, we're getting back to the podcast.
I'm looking forward to see how this gets edited. This is going to be good.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you won't see this at all. I'm out.
Oh, boo. Listen, there's a kind of a question I've always wanted to ask you, Austin, and it started with me and Damien. We were on one of our Damien's been on my show almost as much as Malarkey. Like they're neck and neck for being the people who've been on most, and Tara from Lycia. Those three people have been on more than anyone. And Damien and I were talking one night, and I think it was not on the podcast. I think we stopped. We were on for about 7 hours together. No bullshit. We were drinking, and we did about 4 hours on the podcast that I narrowed down to 3. And we were just talking shit for hours. And it came up where like, yo, how'd you meet Austin? I asked him. And he's like, oh yeah, this, like we went through it a little bit. And I was like, yo, is he Christian? And he's like, I wondered the same thing. I said, I don't even know why I want to know that, but like, you know, it seems to me like he's a Christian or something. I get that vibe. I don't know where that came from, but I kind of got that impression, and I don't know why. I think it's because you're such a positive person that it kind of like smacked of that for me, or maybe a Krishna. I don't know, but inquiring minds want to know.
I think once people who know me, if anyone listens to this, they're going to be spitting their water out of their nose right now. First of all, the fact that you think I'm positive, that's a beautiful thing. As you get to know me even more, Peter, you learn that the heart is cold, it's dead, it's black. and selfishly, like, one of my favorite parts about running the record label is like I don't have to put up with people's bullshit.
Yeah.
So if someone starts being a punisher online, I refund them, delete their order, they never order for me again. And it's so wonderful to be able to do that. But to answer your question, no, not a Christian. I'm very, very atheist.
Okay.
And that's the first anyone's ever maybe made that assumption about me. I am straight edge. So, you know, I don't drink. So along with that, I get a lot of assumptions that I am perhaps vegan, which I'm not vegan either. I just simply don't drink. Keep it simple.
I legitimately have no idea what gave Damien or I the impression that, like, hey, maybe he's Christian. You think that's what it is? Like, it's a funny thing. You know how you see someone on the street maybe that you know you definitely don't know, but you get an impression immediately, like, you know, I'll bet he skins cats in the backyard, or, you know, he owns a cache of weaponry. You know, maybe he likes to LARP. You know, like my immediate, like, not having spoken to you yet impression was it seems like he's a really nice, peaceful guy. Like, you think he's Christian or a Krishna or something with the C with some godheads in it. What do you think, bro? And Damien got the same kind of like thing. Like, you know, he did do the stuff with the Zayo people. I'll bet you he is, but no. And Damien,
everyone is wrong. The guesses were all wrong.
And Damien is nothing if not an atheist. So he and I differ in that category. I'm very weirdly spiritual. I just don't know what to call it. Probably like peanut butter and jelly sandwichism. I don't know. I don't know how you describe it, but I think the world's weird and mystical and beautiful. But I was raised by hippies. Let's face it. But yeah, it was just a funny
Yeah,
thing.
I am at my core, a nihilist and a misanthrope. And, if anything, getting older and having kids has probably changed the way that I express a lot of that. It's like my childhood was not terrific. And so, a lot of that anger festered in my adolescence and my, early college years. Um, and so now I'm at a point where it's like, I still believe that the world is a shithole,
Yeah.
but now I have a responsibility to make sure that my children aren't a part of that shithole. And so I have to view it differently. I have to look at it a little bit differently. And I get called on it a lot. I'm thankful for my wife and our family, because, when I start to spiral down that drain, they'll be like, whoa, 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 let's pump the brakes. We don't have to be angry all the time. Like, you're right. Okay. And so, to that end, we have a unique space in our house because my wife and I are both atheist. But when we get to this time of year, like, absolutely, we introduce our kids to Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and Christmas, and like, make your own choices, kids.
Yeah.
Like, you figure out what's going to be best for you. I'm not going to pretend to know everything. I went down that path in my youth, and there's something about being practically ejected from the church because of how I looked or the music that I listened to, that made it so easy to be like, cool, I don't need anything to do with this.
Yeah.
And they can experience that for themselves, or maybe have a totally different experience because they are their own people. But it's hard to not project those things onto them. So yeah, we're very conscientious about that.
There's
So
that.
that's why it gives me that laughter that the perception might be the other way.
I'm probably a good example of everything you just kind of mentioned too. Having come from some pretty unspeakable abuses in my childhood home, that's what drove me to punk, and that's what drove me out of Catholicism. But for some reason, it didn't beat the spiritual out of me for some reason. It actually kind of deepened it in a strange way. Only because the house I grew up in was very just odd. It was, to paraphrase one of my childhood best friends who I'm still friends with, every time I walked into that house, it felt like someone was trying to tear my soul out of my body. And that resonated with not only me, but all 5 of my siblings, because that was exactly the experience of being in that house. And we move into this house, like, not to jumble it up with some of my personal shit, but from ages like 2 to 12, we lived in one home, and then we moved 2 blocks up the road, move into this fixer-upper that never got fixed up because we were living in it. No one fixes up a house they live in, face it. But we get in there, and everyone's personality changed. There was something about this place that was very ominous and like obsidian. It was a void. It was a spiritual void, this house. Everyone changed. Everyone became their worst selves here, except for my mom. She's the fucking best. But that's what, sadly, the dark shit is what makes me believe in something maybe interdimensional, or psychologically invented to the point where it became real, if that makes sense. But I think there's some dark energy in the universe, and for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So there's probably something, if not benevolent, at least nicely neutral. and if you want to call it Jesus, Buddha, Hare Krishna, or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the closet, I'm good with all of those. That's where I come from. So it's
Yeah, I think that's a healthy approach to have, truly, because I mean, then you get down that debate of, whose God is the right God, whose God is the wrong God, and it's like, well, that's such sketchy territory to be in.
well, I mean, it's a silly argument. That's like pulling off school shootings because there are Eagles fans in the school, and you're anybody who's not an Eagles fan, because everybody hates Eagles fans. So they're like, you get into these things that are really like non sequiturs in the grand scheme of reality, and let that chap your ass. Like, come on, man. Life sucks to begin with. Why make it infinitely harder for other people around you? That's why I don't think you're a nihilist, because I can't picture you trying to make someone's life more difficult just for the sake of it. That's, to me, true nihilism. Now you have the nihilists from, the French nihilists, Sartre, people like that. I can get down with that. I was way into it as a kid, especially because it spoke to me, and I was angry and pissed, and I'm sure you were too. But how did you find that? How did you stumble into that?
I mean, I think it was just the environment that I grew up in, like it was one of those moments where, I think about all the values and, core values that I have now. At some point, somewhere along the way, someone would introduce me to a record and they'd be like, hey, this is all that stuff you're always talking about, So I had belief systems that I didn't know were belief systems because I didn't know that other people shared them. It was, even I remember when a buddy of mine gave me a copy of, Earth Crisis. And it was like, hey man, this band's always saying about the same stuff you're always talking about. And then that's when I learned that straight edge was the thing, and that there was a whole community of people that shared those same beliefs. And so, I think just growing up in those types of environments, right, you just create these, I don't know, protections, I guess, around you to shield you from whatever's going on. And in my youth, it's foolish enough to think that I was the first person to think of those things. And and then as you get older and you realize, like, no, that like this shit's happening everywhere, and for different reasons people feel the same way that you do, and that's where you find that community. And when I said earlier, like hardcore saved my life, like that's what I mean. Finding out that I'm not alone. Whereas I might have felt like a pariah at the time because no one else understood. I found at least one other person who understood, and we shared that bond for 3 minutes just to be in a room together to do whatever. And like that's it's just wild to me to think that somewhere out there's a world full of people that feel similarly. And I don't know, like, again, I feel that obligation and that I need to give back to that, because that got me through so many different hurdles throughout my life, and I'm thankful now that I have so many less of those. But I know that I'm not uh, immune to the fact that I know that there's someone out there right now. There's some 19-year-old kid that feels the way that I felt, and it's like, can I do anything to help them? I don't know. We'll find out.
So you were 19 when you got into hardcore, or
No,
younger?
I was definitely younger. Yeah, I was in my early teens. I lived in a very small town, so we didn't have we didn't have a scene to speak of. There was no record stores. So admittedly, I got into hardcore either from friends. I actually distinctly remember one time I had a friend who he bought a CD off of eBay, and it was just a CDR. It was literally some kid just made a mixtape and was selling them on eBay, and it had Refused and Dillinger Escape Plan and a whole bunch of other like bands that are obviously seminal now. But that was the first time we were hearing that. We're in his living room listening to the C. We're like, we don't know who the fuck these bands are, but they're incredible, and now we need to figure out who they are. And we didn't have Shazam then. We do a lot of work to figure out who it was. Or whenever I wanted to buy like a hardcore CD, most of them were Christian hardcore, because I had the only access that I had were like local Christian bookstores, where I could go and I could say, hey, I need this new Living Sacrifice, wait 6 weeks and come in, and then I could finally go and get it. And so I didn't have a lot of access to it. And it wasn't really until I got into college, truly, that I had unfettered access. And then at that point, it was like, okay, I've got a job, I've got a car, and I'm living, at least slightly further away from this very small town. And so during that time period, I mean, it would be 3 nights a week. You would find me driving from the middle of the state to Detroit to go to a rock and roll show,
Yeah.
just to be at the shelter and seeing who was playing there. And that was when things really took off. But definitely, those moments of, when you're a youth and you've got your Walkman, you put in that cassette, headphones, and you're sitting in your room, like those were incredibly formative for me. And so it's like that's the part that I still get to do that to this day, and it's great that I get to do it with rad people, and I get to be the first person to maybe hear this record and then be like, okay, how can I shape this and put it back out in a different way and give someone that butterfly feeling.
And that's what's I think I took for granted how cool my very small city that I grew up in a suburb of. Scranton is not a big city by any stretch of the imagination. It's a shitty town. It's getting better, but it was just a small city. I'm juxtaposed by two very small cities, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and Scranton, Pennsylvania. Growing up in my town, there was a small clutch of skater / hardcore kids that I had fallen in with. And my claim to fame was my uncle and dad took me to see The Who with the Clash opening at Shea Stadium in '83. So I'd already gotten punk cred before I knew I was a punk, before I knew what punk really was. and I stumble into the suicidal tendencies of it all and Minor Threat, and that's all. It had already kind of happened by the time I found it, but that late '80s youth crew thing was starting to really trickle in, and that's when I started going to shows. And we got Inside Out played my town, Gorilla Biscuits a bunch of times, Judge, Bold, Shelter, like they would come through here because there was about 100 kids, 150 kids who would come and see them.
Yep.
I got so lucky to grow up, almost on the East Coast, and to be close enough to New York City and close enough to Philadelphia that people would give half a shit to jump through here. I can't imagine, growing up where you did and trying to find something to call your own. I found hardcore for the same reasons you did. I had siblings. I love my siblings, but I didn't have a family that I connected with in any kind of meaningful way. And, being the skinny, dorky kid with an inordinately deep voice for a 12-year-old, especially, I got made fun of. I had big ears. I wasn't the nicest looking guy on earth. So I got fucked with a lot. And I had to learn how to fist fight, and I got really angry, and I had nowhere to put it. So I find this very aggressive, very inordinately positive in many respects music. And these people who, okay, you're going to fuck each other up in a mosh pit, but somebody's going to pick you up, dust you off, and give you a hug and be like, all right, let's get back to it. And you're not just a spectator. You're a part of an organism almost. It saved my life. Like it saved your life.
Yeah.
That's why I played in hardcore bands, and that's why I'm doing a podcast today. And it's great that you have something that I think is really resonates with the people who are in the know. Mind Over Matter is a very, it's almost a prestigious thing because it's so fully realized in its way by everything that you do. Even the t-shirts, I think, are just very well done and thoughtful. I understand though that they're not exactly as easy to monetize. You know what I mean? Like doing a t-shirt is, it's not as fetishized. I think that's getting better though.
Yeah.
Because I get emails and text messages from people that I know that, do you still have that, Earth Crisis Destroy the Machines hoodie that you had back in 94? Well, yeah, I do, because I keep everything. Why? Oh, I'll give you $170 for it. It's like, well, come on over, man. I mean, there's that market now, but it's wild how this thing that, it was quaint almost, that we're a part of this little thing that's under the radar, that I can't imagine back in like 1990 that I would be able to sell my Infest t-shirt for $450, but I did. I have a Marginal Man t-shirt that they screen printed in front of me and sold me. And I sold that for about $500.
Yeah.
What is going on? And I'm not one of these people who are angry at bands like Turnstile. I think it's great that they're huge. I love them.
Absolutely.
I think they're great. I think, yeah, do they sound a lot like 311? Yeah. I'm not mad about that. I think they're pretty good. I mean, they're a really good version of the Quickness era Bad Brains, is what they are. But they're phenomenal.
I think it's also important to recognize, like I've been saying for quite a while now, that like we, in the evolution, the cycle of popular music, that we've been due for like guitar music to come back into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's easy to roll your eyes as like, a quote unquote hardcore kid and look at Turnstile and be like, oh, this is not hardcore. But like that's that gateway band. That's going to be that band that someone's going to find them, and then they're going to end up on 856's YouTube channel, and then they're going to discover a whole new universe of music it's going to shift their reality. I think that's huge. So like I'm super excited to see bands like Turnstile, Scowl, Gel, like all these bands that are just doing, amazing stuff right now. And some of these albums are great. Some of them, got a emergency on my street. But not, they don't have to be that perfect record for me, because I think it's just important that that's going to be a gateway for somebody. So I celebrate that shit. I think it's amazing, and I'm excited to see that type of music just start to get popular again, because I think that's gonna unleash just a floodgate. I think in 5 or 6 years we're gonna have just a pile of amazing bands, because the youth of today is gonna discover music that they didn't know was popular, and it'll be easy for people in our age to go, it was better back in the 90s, but it's still going to be, it's the circle of life here, and in 20 years time those kids will have their own record labels and their own podcasts, or whatever version of podcasts exists in 2050, and they'll be pontificating about how Turnstile changed their life. And I think that's huge. I think that's amazing.
And furthermore, like I think the last time something got this close to the mainstream, with the exception of Nirvana was a part of the reason why this happened, but Sick of It All, Scratch the Surface, 1994. That record, released on the same label or subsidiary of the same label as Pantera, East West Records. Scratch the Surface comes out. It provides a yet another bridge for metal people to come into hardcore and be like, okay, this is heavy, but it's not quite metal, but it's metal enough that I'm going to get into it. And that made hardcore really grow again, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody's like, well, hardcore is dead. I mean, that was the word on the street, even going to hardcore shows. Like, yeah, I mean, it's cool, but it's not as cool as it was in 85. Like, sorry, dude, in 85, I was 9. I wasn't going to hardcore shows yet. I still had a couple years. But, like that was the word on the street. That was, yeah, it's not like it was when it first happened. Yeah, okay, whatever. But it started to become something again. And that 92 through 95, 96 period, where bands like Snapcase, Earth Crisis, Strife were really generating heat on the album charts proper, which was really interesting. And that, of course, had its time and then fell away. And
Yeah.
I have no piss takings about pop music, or especially hip hop, because hip hop's like a dead 50% of what I was into when I was a kid. It was hip hop and hardcore and post punk. That was all my, universe of music. But now, like, I had no problem with any of it. I didn't love pop music, but I wasn't sitting around going, the kids these days, because who the fuck was I? But I draw a distinct parallel between that mid 90s thing to now, with the exception of one thing. What we were trying to make happen then is actually happening now, with the PC of it all, the acceptance of it all, because we were very much pro all of that. We were very much into, like equality and feminism and gay rights. And now it's such a reality that I almost, I don't feel responsible, but I feel proud that we were protagonists for something that came into fruition finally. And I think, since there's a slight difference in age between us, I wonder, like, what your view of that is, because I think your generation was a bit closer to seeing this realized than mine was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think we have too much of an age gap. So I just turned 40 this year.
Right.
So just a little bit behind you, but I think you're totally right. And I think that what we did well was we kind of laid that foundation um, for that to be just kind of like an important part of the community, of the scene. And I think that, I remember, starting my first anti-racist action chapter,
Yeah.
in my college town, and being like, this is something we need. And I knew a lot of people in my age were like, why do we need that? Like, that's not a thing. I'm like, no, it's a thing. You got to be, you have to be aware of it. So I think that, as we've grown up and we've had kids of our own, and we've had that mentality shift we were talking about, how do you raise them to be a part of the solution instead of being a part of the problem. So now some of those kids have gotten old enough, and they've started bands, and they're in that scene, and they just grew up hearing acceptance and understanding that, that it's not just a boys club in the hardcore scene, and that we do have to be open and welcoming. And they've known that their whole lives. Whereas I think maybe when you and I were going to hardcore shows in its heyday, there was maybe still people that were coming and they were learning about that for the first time. It almost felt like at times that we were kind of recruiting to be like, hey
Oh
man,
yeah.
you got to be a part of this movement. And now it's built into the scene, which I think is incredible. So not to
We,
pat ourselves on the back when I say we laid the foundation, but I think that some of the
we,
work we did was important to that end.
we were still, like, especially in Pennsylvania, still kicking Nazis out of the scene in the early 90s. It was especially Allentown. There was a very storied venue called the Airport Music Hall. And Allentown, it was then and still is kind of besieged by white power groups. And there's a whole story behind all that I will tell you off camera, because I'm not going to incriminate myself. But we got into some things that became very confrontational. And I'm sure it's a necessity in some places still, but I don't think it's as widespread. But being married to a woman of color now is not as counter as it would have been back then in this area, which is completely mind-blowing to me, because my uncle's a man of color, and I remember it being a very hot button when I was in high school and junior high school, to the point where like their home would get vandalized and I'd end up in fistfights. That wouldn't, like, as much as the Trump thing became so polarizing, at least you know who those people are.
Yeah, they wear the hats.
They wear the hats. They you know what I mean? Not all Nazis shaved their heads and wore braces back in those days. Like they came in every form. It's I just think, for as polarized and fucked up as society has become in this era, I still think it's a bit better than it was. Quite a bit.
Yeah. Again, I think that's where that nihilism maybe sneaks in a little bit because I don't think quite a bit. I think it's marginally better. I just think it's messed up that there's still just places in the world that there's an open space for them. You know, they have that community the same way that we do, and I think that's fucked up. Um, I think back to, kind of going back to when I said we were talking about like recruiting, I have an anti-swastika tattoo that I got when I was like 17.
Mhm.
And I remember through most of my life, I'd meet people like, why do you have that? Like, again, that's not a problem, man. Like Nazis aren't really around. And when I was in a band, I remember we had this bad habit of, we would book these DIY tours and they would fall apart. We would just find any show that we could find to hop on so we could still play a show when we were out on tour.
Yeah.
And we were in Canada and we played this bar. And we did the same thing we always did. We had a show that fell through, so we rolled up to this bar and we said, "Hey, listen, we just want to play a show tonight. Can we set up our merch? We'll play first. We can do our thing." And they were like, "Sure, why not?" So we get everything all set up. We start playing. I'm a sweaty mess. I take off my shirt. People start to fill in. They're doing their thing, and I realized about maybe halfway through the set that we are at a Nazi bar, and this place is filled wall to wall with white supremacists. And I'm like, "Where the fuck is my shirt? We need to rectify this, and I need to get out of this building ASAP. Like I am heavily outnumbered." And so we literally we wrapped up that set. We got our stuff. We busted out of there, and they were like, "Holy shit, you almost died." And I was like, "Yes, I did." And now you understand like why I have this tattoo and why I feel the way that I do. Again, that tattoo almost just literally got me, kicked out of Canada and potentially murdered. But I think that's just that reminder for me is that if anything, the internet has made it easier for these people to find that community. And so and again, that's where maybe 10 years ago I would have been just filled with frustration and rage over knowing that that was a thing, and now it's like, well, now I'm just my responsibility is with my kids and making sure that they don't fall into that community. How do I find them that more positive, supportive one that's gonna teach them positive life lessons instead of whatever bullshit they're spewing.
Now we've come to the part of the show, ladies and gentlemen, where I ask the one and only pre-written question that I have for every person that comes on the podcast, which is, what is it that terrifies you on an existential level? I ask everyone this because it cuts to the quick of who you are as a person. What we fear is kind of what we are.
That's one of those that has probably changed throughout the years. But I think, I don't know. I think right now at this point in my life, like there's not much that I fear. I think I've conquered all that I came to conquer, and I had those moments in my life where it was like, all right, it was a turning point, and they sound cliche, but when you learn like, hey, you only get one shot at this, and so you gotta just grab the bull by the horns. And I've lived through those, and I'm happy to say that any point where I've had a choice to make, I just did it. I took the plunge. I took that that fearful step forward, and I think if I died tomorrow, I would be satisfied with everything that I've accomplished. Like I've learned to let go of that fear of not seeing that thing through to the end. Like we've talked a lot about my kids, but
Yeah.
I'll never see that through to the end. I won't fully know how they live their whole lives, how they complete all of those things. But I've learned to let go of that need to like see it through to the bitter end and be that person who finishes everything. And I feel confident that when I'm given an opportunity, I'm gonna run with it. I'm gonna do my damnedest at it, and hopefully, enrich some people around me while I do it.
So control is something that seems to be a prescient thing in the fore of your mind, like seeing things through the end and like steering the course of fate seems to have been something that you needed to get past.
Yeah, Yeah, I used to really think that everything's pre-written and that, it was doomed from the start. Why bother,
Right.
And then that turned into to your point, kind of a control piece. Like, okay, well, I gotta wrap my arms around this. I'm not gonna let anything control me like that. And yeah, I've learned to let that go quite a bit. And now it's about, all right, I'm along for the ride. I'm gonna let the cards fall how they may, and then I'm gonna do the best with whatever I'm given for those cards. And that gamble is fun. And with that, you get to let go of that fear. You get to let go of that panic of what if, and instead turn it into a positive. Yeah, what if? What if something good happens?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's why when you asked me that, I said that that's changed a lot over the years because I think that again, in my youth, it would have been like, oh God, what if? And now I look forward to those moments because I recognize that every time I've been faced with one of those, it worked out great. Took the plunge, and it was a pivotal moment for me.
It's interesting because every time I bring it up, I tell some version of what it is for me, and it's strange that it's something so intangible that one I don't think could conceivably get over it because growing up, Nova on PBS was a big deal for me because I was into science. I was a very nerdy kid, and I would watch Carl Sagan on PBS, and he would talk about the vast expanse of the universe, and at some point in the the celestial bodies that populate our universe will subside and there will be a nothingness. And I was very young, like probably my son's age, 4 or 5 years old, and that notion sucked the air out of the room. I would like, what? There's a nothingness. There's just nothing, just vacuum, nothing. That has haunted me for the entirety of my life. And there's no reason for it to, because I will never know it, never experience it. I will have no occasion to get on any kind of vessel and make it out into that nothing. It's never going to happen. Why does that freak me the fuck out? But it does. It is a legitimate like terror to the point where I often still have like nightmares about it. And I have it's pretty rare. Sleep paralysis disorder. It's supposed to go away when you're a teenager. Like once puberty ends, it's supposed to go. It never left me fully. And the impetus for so many of these things is there's nothing. and then I get over it. But isn't it strange how some people are grounded enough to fear something that you could conquer, and then there's neurotic old me who hangs on to something that has absolutely no bearing on reality. That's why I'm a romantic.
7 months ago, 7 months ago, you could have hopped into a vessel and just gone into the ocean to find the nothing. But I hear that business model didn't work out so.
They were just rich enough to die for nothing. Good for you. Oh, that's beautiful. We're bad people. We're bad people.
Yeah.
So what's next on the horizon for you as far as releases go? Without, I know you don't want to blow yourself up, give up the ghost, but what exciting new adventures are in the future for Mind Over Matter?
Yeah, I'll spill the beans. I'm not
Okay.
I'm not intentionally obtuse with it. The main reason that I maybe don't share a lot of things until they're ready to roll is just because some people in the vinyl community can really be punishers, and so when they know something is coming, they'll start that process of like, sending me an Instagram message every week, like, when's this going to be ready? And I'm like, it'll be ready when it's ready. I don't need all that. But obviously we've got the Shady Side record, which, as of taping, that's going to come out tomorrow. By the time everyone else hears this, it will have been out in the world for a little bit. So I'm really excited to see how people respond to, we're still just gonna have one song out. We're gonna launch quote unquote pre-orders. I've got the records in hand already. Admittedly, I'm waiting on some jackets still, and we're going to do some screen printing on the jackets also. So it's going to be pretty intense packaging. I'm excited about it. Uh, and then I'm right now, you can't see it in this room, but I'm surrounded by records down on the floor here. I've got 5 other releases that are sitting here that I'm waiting for just either like some inserts or for some jackets or for me to do some screen printing. I've got some represses, which is nice. So we've got a few new colorways of the Gilt Bardstown Ugly Box
Knew that was coming.
because that one sold so well. People were really excited about it, and a lot of people missed out. And so Duncan and I agreed we didn't want that to turn into another Bad Rabbit situation where people were paying top dollar on Discogs. So we've got 3 new colors for that, and they're awesome. They look killer. We're also doing a repress of the Dad Hats record that we released earlier this year.
So good.
So good. So good.
So they were on the
band,
show for that, and I loved every second of it. I love that band so much.
that band is so good, and that album
Yep.
is so good, and I'm happy to see that it got a strong response. And so yeah, we've got a couple colors of that one coming out. We're doing another run of the Zayo Yashira split 7-inch
Yeah.
that's been out of print since 2018. Um, I'm doing a really cool like DIY version of that one that I'm excited to share with people. The vocalist from the Twin, Brian, he was also in Joshua Fit for Battle back in the day.
Yep.
He's got some acoustic songs that he kind of recorded right around the time of that Twin record, and so we're doing a really cool 7-inch for that one. And then there's a band out of I want to say they're from the Pittsburgh area. I could be a little off on that one. My geography is not the best, but they're called Moraine. Another band that came from the Iodine Dudes. Just some really fun kind of like post-hardcore stuff. It sounds like it would have been something that came out on Equal Vision in like 2003 with a little bit more of like an alternative rock mix in there. So I'm excited to see how that record does. And then I've got 2 Bad Rabbits records at the plant right now. So we're doing a repress of American Love, which is exciting. And then the new record that just came out a few days ago, we're doing a vinyl pressing of that as well. So we're just waiting for all the gears to turn. So there's it's going to be a very busy back half of the year once I get some of these little bits and pieces from the plants that I'm waiting on. And then we're going to start the year strong with probably a handful of releases as well.
My God. I wish we had all night for this, because there's just so much inside baseball with the label and my own personal interests and buying it all off of you. But we all have families and kids. But Austin, you got to come back. We got to do this again. We got to dig deeper, because we have a lot in common, and it's great. And I think I don't know, I think what you do is so special and so unique to our thing. And the last time I had Justin Pearson on the podcast, we talked about how there is this us of it all with the scene that we're from, where it's familial and a recognition of, a cohesion between 2 people that, I don't know, I think it's very obvious that we're kith and kin. So I would love to have you back on again so we could do more of this.
I would love that. One of the things that I've kind of committed to over the last year or so is doing a better job of documenting the work that goes on behind the scenes at the label. There's been so many things that I've done where, it's been to the point of absurdity, the amount of work that has gone into it. And then I put it out, and then I almost wonder, like, did anyone even notice that little detail, that thing that I toiled over for weeks or months. And so I love the idea of diving a little bit deeper into kind of like the processes, because I know that I have a very unique approach to it. The end result may feel the same, but I definitely have a very very specific way that I go about things. And for some it's fantastic. Damien hates the way that I do it. He's like, "Come on, man, let's put the records out." And I'm like, I got a method. Let me do my method. I bless the boys in Shadyside. We've been working on this release now for probably a year and a half.
Yeah.
And it's been laborious, at best. So now we're here at the end, and no one knows all the work that went to get to this point. And so it can sometimes feel a little anticlimactic once you've worked all of that stuff, and you've had all the phone calls and the mock-ups, and you're going back and forth with everything. But I love the idea of getting back on here and doing a little bit more of a deep dive into the process of seeing how the cheese is made, so to speak.
Yeah,
Bring it back to
absolutely.
Swiss cheese. Because it is a process, and it's very unique. So I love that.
So, well, we'll get that on the books soon. And thank you, man. See you soon.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks.
Later on.